Right now, a little more than half of the world's population lives in cities. By 2050, almost 3 billion more people will be urban dwellers. That's 70% of humanity. But are our cities ready for that future? From housing shortages to social divisions, skylines that soar to the communities living in their shadows, the city, as we know it, is at a crossroads. In this Doha Debates Town Hall, in partnership with Qatar's Years of Culture initiative, we ask, how should we reinvent the city? We're bringing together 3 perspectives, distinct and sometimes conflicting, to discuss this issue.
We shouldn't reinvent the city. We should look at the places that work well for humans and for neighborhoods and create more of those and evolve existing places to be more like that.
The city of tomorrow would rely on a collaboration that helps ensure the longevity and the sustainability of the city.
I think cities should be more just. They should guarantee a good life, well-being, and equity for everyone.
Also with us, a group of university students and young adults who have spent weeks preparing for this debate.
There's different layers to city planning, to urban planning, and not just by humans themselves, but also just like the political incentives and ways of constructing in a community.
When we start thinking about it realistically, it's going to be very hard to agree on what a city needs.
But if we were to really analyze and pinpoint the ways in which we can solve a city for it to be caring or competitive, we really have to look at the people.
They join us from Qatar, Argentina, and Chile. We will bring them together with our speakers to engage in a challenging yet respectful Majlis-style debate. Our aim is not to compete, but rather to center our efforts around truth-seeking. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is the Doha Debates Town Hall. Welcome, everyone. It is so good to see your smiling faces, and it is so good to be here with you all. Now, cities. They've always been symbols of ambition and opportunity, but sometimes they're also mirrors of inequality and even environmental decline, which means that we have a lot to unpack today. So I want to begin here on stage with our students. Some of you live here in Buenos Aires, and some of you have been here for just a few days. And so I wonder what these few days have been like and what you've learned about the city. Zaid, let's start with you. What have you learned?
As someone who's coming from Doha, Qatar, it's been an amazing journey. I was born and brought up there my whole life, and being here and meeting the people, it's amazing. I believe a space becomes a place when there's a story attached, and going around Buenos Aires, you're filled with stories, whether it's to the architecture, art, culture, or even the hospitality. And I believe regardless of what side we're on, as long as we can agree on this central storytelling aspect of it, we're all going to inevitably succeed.
I like that. I have definitely felt the hospitality. Rafaela, what about you? You came from Santiago, Chile, is that right? What have you noticed? What have you noticed about Buenos Aires?
In my visit to Buenos Aires, I really love seeing how people enjoy using the public spaces, and also the way these spaces really represent the community. So when you go out, you can see all the cities really alive. So I would love to see that in the future of our cities.
Tomas.
Thank you so much for your question. I really appreciate walkability, safety, and equality in cities. However, I think we shouldn't go as far as to say that cities should only serve the collective. I also think that cities should be flexible enough to serve individual ambitions and to let individuals to pursue their own endeavors.
Homna, you're nodding your head. What are you thinking?
I'm nodding my head, but I'm afraid to say I disagree. I feel like cities overall, I can't help but feel, have turned obsolete in their primary purpose, which has always been to serve people. And when I imagine our collective future, I don't see cities in it. So I think that this town hall is a way for us to reflect and wonder if we're really doing the best that we could be and see how we can actually put people first.
Okay. You gave us something to think about there. You don't see cities in our near future. So I want to pose all of your thoughts, your comments to our guests here on stage. I'll start here. Akel, when you think about a city, how do you define its success? Is it the amount of investment that's able to be brought in, the GDP, or is it something else? Is it walkability, affordability, belonging?
Wonderful question. It's the quality of life. I grew up in New York City, but I live in Doha. And for all intensive purposes, Doha is my home. I've been there 10 years. I feel relaxed. I feel safe. It's accessible to all of the amenities that I need. So I am more attached in many ways to Doha than I am to New York City, where I grew up.
Wow. Nicholas, what about you? How would you define that success and where do you feel attached?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. And brilliant opening points. I'm not sure you need us three. I think you just use the students. We'll just add lethargy. Well, look, I mean, cities are almost as old as man and woman. We've been creating cities for longer than we've had agriculture, before we had writing, before we had government. They're probably in the fount of government. So there's clearly something about the city that we as a species, across time and across culture, require. Because we didn't just make them in the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East, they grew up in the Americas and also in Asia. So they're clearly performing some deep need for us as a society and as a culture. How would I define what makes for a successful city? It is, yes, a city in which people can be prosperous and reach their ends, but it's a city with meaning. I take that point about the story very, 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 very deeply. A city is a place where we can come together. We're not just individuals, we're parts of neighborhoods and communities. We can lead happy and healthy and purposeful and connected and meaningful lives. You used the word torn earlier, which I think is a very good and interesting word. Across much of the 20th century, we de-stitched our cities. We ruptured them, we broke them, we unseamed them, we ripped them apart with freeways that were too wide and too polluting. It was nearly always the poorest bits of the cities that were on the bad end of that. And that's what we now, in this generation, I think need to fix.
Guadalupe.
First of all, cities should be equitable places. I am also very deeply concerned by the reality of many cities in the world. As a Latin American, I am quite familiarized with what is happening in the big capitals, and not only the big capitals, but medium cities also. I've also lived in Toronto, in Montreal, so I know like the first world cities. And unfortunately, in the Global South, we are facing huge problems of inequality. Cities have a lot to do with that. We have been building at an astonishing pace in the last years, but we have been building mostly spaces, urban spaces for consumption, for economic speculative uses, whereas there are many people, a growing number of population that cannot afford basic housing in adequate conditions, that cannot access good quality of transportation, that are living in informal settlements. So for me, above all, and before any question, cities should be places of justice. We have to discuss how do we build places where good living means the possibility for everyone to self-determinate and to self-develop in good quality.
Well, how would you all define success in a city? What marks a successful city? One that you might want to live in, Alfred?
It has to be inclusive. No one should be discriminated against. There should be access to healthcare, education, recreation, all of the necessities that sustain a holistic life. And if those ingredients do not exist, then I think there's a possibility that some of the people will feel disenfranchised, or it will attract the greed and the domination of the few people who hold the power at the expense of the entire community.
Does not feel true for either of you in your definition of success?
Yes, I would also add to Akel that success in a collective sense has a lot to do with the possibility, the capability of self-development, of living a meaningful life according to one's desires, needs. So again, it's very difficult to discuss all these concepts when thinking only in economical terms. That is how we are used to think of success, prosperity, and all that. So I would say that success should be about a just possibility for everyone to develop and to have a meaningful life according to their needs and desires.
I mean, what sort of places work? What are the cities, the neighborhoods, the towns that thrive, that are prosperous, but also are safe and good places to live? They're places where I would argue we naturally, almost instinctively, without rational thought, wish to be. We may wish to be there because we can earn a living. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's quite essential. We may wish to be there because it's a good place to have dinner, or it's an enjoyable place to play, or spend time, or meet people. And the most successful middles, neighborhoods, city areas are the ones where that heady admixture of enjoyment, of work, of sociability, but also the ability to retreat into yourself, because most of us are not sociopaths. We do need a bit of time on our own. I do. This isn't good for that bit. It's those places where we can naturally do those things quite quickly, moving from being a commercial animal to a mother or father, to a child, to a friend, to a fellow neighbor or citizen. The places that make it easy to mingle up those necessarily sometimes in tension, but also actually part of the human condition. Those are the cities and the neighborhoods, I would argue, that thrive.
Okay, as you've been talking, I can see the faces of our students light up, some with disagreement looking like, and some with agreement. So Valentino.
Thank you. I wanted to focus on the idea of progress, of prosperity. I think that, to me, that means a private sector working with an efficient government, an efficient public sector in terms of urban planning, in terms of progress. So I wanted to ask you what you think about, and how can it be possible for the government to work and to sort of work with the private sector in terms of sort of the urban planning, the urban consulting, the coding in terms of cities. And what do you think, if it is possible or not, to have that in our cities and in the future? Thank you.
Akel.
May I respond to that? I think the question is a legitimate one, but I think if you look at the case studies, I can give you examples. For example, Islamabad, right? Islamabad was planned in the 1960s by a very world-famous architect named Doxiadis. And it was a city that today it's a capital city. The government of Pakistan wanted to create an image for themselves, in the post-colonial era. And so they brought in Doxiadis to plan the city. It was laid out on a grid, like a chessboard, right? But today, 38% of Islamabad is slums, which means that the architects are the greatest culprits. I'm an architect, I'll be honest with you. It's redemptive for me to say this. They're the greatest culprits that have created the most disaster. And so what has happened to Islamabad, it has, in my opinion, totally failed. Why? You can have private sector, you can have investors, you can have government. Where are the sociologists? Where are the psychologists? There's a human element there that has been overlooked. And if you want to read more about this, read Jane Jacobs, The Death and Life of American Cities. Robert Moses in New York City did the same thing, segregated the city. So yes, we need money to build, but we need to consult with others who will have some say about the behavior of people and make sure that it is well balanced and inclusive.
We have some architecture students here, so I was looking for their faces as you said that. I'm interested to hear what they think about that. But Manahil, I know that you wanted to get in.
Mr. Boyce-Smith, I wanted to comment on how you described the city almost as an organism. You know, like we can police them, we can plan them, but at the end of the day, they seem to assume a life of their own and something that is beyond our control. And I think it's interesting how you situate us today in this present moment as existing in this phase of disintegration or regeneration. But what I'm curious about, and something that a question that troubles me, is what brought us to that point of regeneration? Why was that necessary? And my answer for that, based on my experiences back home in Pakistan, our week here in Buenos Aires, is that it's the exploitation of immigrants, poor women, just vulnerable individuals socially or economically, who are the backbone of these cities that we are now existing in, and some prosper in and some don't. And so I would argue, and this is a question that I pose to all of you, I would argue that this regeneration is not a passive process. It's the product of the choices that we make that are very capitalist and very exploitative in many situations. And I think it's worth wondering why villages and non-urban spaces don't reach this point of regeneration, but cities do.
I think that's for me. Thank you for calling me Mr. Boyce-Smith. I feel terribly important. That's very kind of you. Thank you very much indeed. Most people call me Nicholas, but thank you. My answer will touch on the other question as well. It's a really interesting point you started with, Matt. All your points are interesting. Is a city a machine or is it an organism? And I think it then comes back to Akel's point. I would argue that it's an organism. And though it is both possible and indeed necessary for there to be rules for that organism, things it can and can't do that shape and mold it, we've made our greatest mistakes, and this will loop back to the second part of your question, when we have been too arrogant about our confidence to frame the city. You talked about Islamabad. Maxwell Fry, who was a British modernist, who likewise thought that he could, godlike, decree what would happen to cities, he said, I won't get this quite slightly wrong, but he said that architects should address themselves to those capable of understanding us and let the rest go hang. Well, I would disassociate myself from that statement. Look, cities got much bigger. Yes, successful cities, in inverted commas, have always attracted immigrants from the neighbouring countryside. That's clearly always what they've done. The average age in the 17th or 18th century European city was probably about 22, 23, and there was a high urban mortality. People died about 50% faster in cities than they did in the countryside. I'm not saying that was a good thing, I'm just reporting on facts. What then changed, above all in the 19th century, was first of all, of course, you had the Industrial Revolution, so you had factories, then you had steam trains, and so cities just got much bigger. And yes, they were very exploitative. Probably the worst time, I know, do you know, that's a dangerous comment. A very bad time to be poor, there are lots of bad times to be poor, was to be a child labourer in 19th century Manchester. And I'm not saying it wasn't bad in other places. Engels called it hell on earth, and a conservative British soldier, who probably disagreed with Engels on pretty much everything, he called it the gates to hell. So I think they basically agreed that Manchester in about 1860 was a really bad place to be. Then during the late 19th and 20th centuries, we started to control that, so we started regulating child labour in factories, and then you had modernism, architectural modernism, you had the Cities Beautiful movement, you had the Garden Cities movement, all trying to escape this heavily polluted hell that had been created with Manchester as epicenter, but there were many, many others, including, for example, Chicago. But we overcorrected. We said, we've got to escape from this industrial hellhole, so let's, back to your point, let's come in and totally plan the city. And we basically got it deeply, deeply wrong and made enormous errors of the type that was just being discussed. So to come back to that first question, which was really spot on, I would argue that the role of government, and there needs to be government in cities, there always has been clearly, isn't to try and plan and control everything and foresee the future, because you can't foresee the future, you can never know, but is just to use the evidence and what people like and where they feel at home to code for the creation and the stewardship of streets and squares and greens and places where we can come together that align with where people wish to be, find humane, and encourage physical activity and coming together. So there's always been this role. In 12th century London, they coded not to have thatched roofs, because if you live in house A and I live in house B and my house burns down and burns your down, you'd probably just rather we'd had a slate roof. So government has always been pulled into this, but be cautious. Don't try and do too much.
I hope that helps on both.
Yeah, I would like to go back to this organism-machine antagonism. I may need to disagree with that. I think cities, above all, are a product of political decisions. So yes, we have been taking a lot of very bad political decisions, and throughout capitalist urbanization, obviously the urban development has been a way of absorbing and reproducing capital. So yes, we have not taken notice of women, immigrants, workforces. We have been not taking notice of anyone or anything, including nature, which is not valuable in terms of capital. So how should we, in terms of urban planning and urban development, address these or start addressing these challenges? And back to your question or your comment, Valentino, I would say urban planning was born as a public function. It is a duty of governments to take care and to think, and I would say to plan also, that is not to have like a visionary power, but to think in advance in long term in terms of sustainability. That's a public function. A public function means that it should be developed in terms of everyone's well-being, not sectorial interests. So private actors should be obviously a part of the debate and the dialogue, but it is governments, which is not to say that there are no interests and no antagonism and contradictions, but it's governments who should regain the power of think of urban development and to think it in the most just and democratic ways.
There's a wealth of knowledge and information on this stage, and so I want to turn the tables a little bit, because piggybacking on what Akel said, there are some on our stage who believe that a city's livelihood depends on competition, investment, productivity. And I want to know why you feel that way. Carl, you're one of those. What's behind that?
I believe cities should be competitive, because I look at my own city, Harare. The thing is, if you look at Harare in the 1960s or 70s and now, it has never developed to that point where it's competitive. Actually, more problems have come from it not being competitive, like more people and inflation and things like that. I think the key issue is not really whether we have democracy or this, but if a leadership is able to take care of its people, to provide for what the people actually want, then that would be great. And as much as we might want also to start with having a caring city, if there is no money, how do you care for people? There should be that money, the good leadership, and then the power to redistribute. And I think that's how a competitive city will improve the quality of life for everyone in it, honestly.
Nicholas, you're taking notes there.
I always take notes. And also we'll come back partly to the challenge earlier. Look, people come to cities because they wish to, and people stay there because they tend to earn more money and be more productive. So the average American citizen of a metropolis, of a big city, is 50% more productive than someone who isn't, and earns about 30% more. The average New York citizen, this is a few years ago, earns I think 170 or 60% more than is normal in the States. The average, lawyers are better lawyers, doctors are better doctors, because we create organically, come back to that metaphor, networks of interaction, of learning, of competition, of cooperation, very often in cities, even now, even in the Zoom age, You've got the neighborhood where people do this, people do that. And then you get this rich nexus of people maybe working in the same company, maybe meeting for lunch, maybe setting up a new firm, maybe setting up a charity in the same sector. And you can have nexuses in the private sector, you can have nexuses in the third sector and everything else. That is why cities have, one of the reasons, there are others, why cities have been so important for world history. To come back to the job of government, I didn't say there shouldn't be a role for government. I very carefully said there should be a role for government. I just said that government should be modest and thoughtful about what it seeks to do, because government can do harm as well as do good. I have to say, if you'll forgive me, the thought of government coming in and specifically telling people, I'm sorry, you're living in the wrong neighborhood, there are too many black or not enough black people in this neighborhood, you need to move. I find that quite dystopian, actually. I want people to choose where they live. I think of governments that have told people which bit of the city they can live in, and I don't think that's a very good place to start. So I would be respectful of where people choose. You get what are called sorting effects in cities, where people of similar or different levels of prosperity or culture or interest making different trade-offs. A bigger home further from the center, a smaller home nearer the center. That's a trade-off. I would let people make that trade-off for themselves. I would very, very, very strongly encourage you, or you start going down a dark path. And the trick then for government is to make sure that there are enough homes so that everyone can prosper, because we all know, and you touched on this earlier, if there aren't enough homes, everyone starts losing prosperity, but it's always the poor who suffer the most. So make sure there are enough homes, but let people choose where they want to live and allow people to agglomerate and be productive, but it ain't just about the money.
So I think we should go back and understand why are cities so important. Why are people moving to cities? I'm from Santiago de Chile. I'm from the capital city, and I see all around students having to move to get better opportunities. So I think what would happen if we actually make rural places actually as good as cities, so they don't have always to move. So I'm really concerned about how are we gonna make cities better, but also give opportunities to growth in other places.
Guadalupe.
Yeah, many comments. First of all, I would say that whereas many people choose to move to a city, most people are displaced and need to go to a city. So those are very different processes. In terms of building up on the issue of resources, I would go to the specific urban spaces. We have now probably more vacant home than in the whole history of cities. So we are building residential places that are inhabited by no one.
Are we talking about the world here? Are we talking about Buenos Aires? Where?
Buenos Aires has a huge problem, but this is a problem in every capital city, in every big city in the world.
It's not a problem in London. We don't have a problem with empty salaries in London. They're very, very tiny proportion compared to any benchmark of empty homes. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know the specific number in London. We have studied, from Buenos Aires, we have studied and compared with many cities. Obviously, it's a very difficult estimation, but in Buenos Aires, there are probably 9 to 10% of vacant homes in the city. That is pretty equal to the need for homes. So in Latin America in general, we speak of homes without people and people without homes. That is the worst reality. So when you think of resources in terms of redistribution, it means that you first have to acknowledge that the resources are somewhere and should be put into the table. If you go kind of higher in the abstraction, real estate property is also a mean of fiscal evasion. People, the richer social groups do not pay adequate taxes for their properties, or they hide some part of their wealth in fiscal paradises. So I think it's not so much a problem of not having economic resources or material resources, but rather of who is not working in a collaborative way. And in that terms, collaboration is kind of opposite to competition. Because when you have to compete, you are not thinking in terms of solidarity and how do we build equity and inclusion. So I understand that competition may foster development, and some doses of competition could be healthy. But in the current urban situation, I do believe we should be thinking more in terms of collectivity and solidarity rather than competition.
Yes, there's competition, but there's also community and neighborhood, because that is innate to the human condition. Yeah, you get some people who are on the extremes, but cities will always have and always will. So I think, for those of you who've got strong Marxist positions, fine, hold those by all means. But trying to make everyone equal through the metric of the city is going to lead to the same outcomes in the future that it has in the past, and they're called death. By firing squad or by execution. So I would discourage us to go there. Certainly, I wouldn't want to live in that city. Most predictions, which haven't come in here, so I'd like to introduce something new as to the death of the city, and not about sort of Marxist politics, but it's about the fact that during the last 70 or 80 years, given the choice, and it has to be said, incentivized through tax breaks, increasingly people, yes, in the rich West, above all America, have fled the city. They have moved to the suburbs from after World War II onwards. So the normal discussion about the death of the cities, is it just going to turn into suburbia or suburbs that stretch on forever? Because the so-called stated preference, if you ask people what's your ideal home, I don't know evidence on that in South America, but I do know it in Europe. About 70% of most people, about 70% of everyone in most societies, every society I've seen, say that their ideal home will be what I in English call a detached house, and what in American English you call a family home. People put the most value on places where they get some of the advantages of that detached home, perhaps their own garden if they're rich enough, or a mansion block with access to a communal garden for a few people, but also some of the advantages of propinquity, of proximity, the ability for their children to cycle to school. So we create streets, we call that gentle density, where you're getting some of the advantages of the city, but also some of the advantages of the suburbs. And we would argue that that should be the future, trying to optimize. Will it work for everyone? No. Will it solve all of humanity's problems? No, it won't. But it's a good path to finding a middle way.
Show of hands here on stage. Who likes this idea? This gentle density, is that your ideal of where you want to live?
I don't think I've taken the room with me.
A few people. Convincing argument to a few people. Guadalupe, I want to pivot to you with that, seeing how that may not be the ideal for some people. You have argued in the past that the way to get towards the ideal is to stop building as of right now, until we can figure that out. Talk to me about the stop building idea and why.
Well, a few years ago, the Rapporteur on Adequate Housing of the United Nations estimated that real estate assets were about $200 trillion, which were by then about 60% of all global assets. Since the 2008 crisis, we have been not only building a lot, producing a lot of urban space, but it's also an urban space that is mostly directed to, as I mentioned before, speculative economic purposes. So what I mean that we should stop building is that we should stop producing this kind of urban space. Not only beyond from London example, but from cities that are producing offices for ABC1 categories or high income apartments. We can also think about ghost cities in China, complete giant cities underused, only again to absorb excess capital that comes from the most unusual productive sectors, from pharmaceutics to agriculture, even to drug trafficking, illegal flows. So we are absorbing and we are producing cities. So we should stop for a moment to produce that kind of a space and think, who are the people who are actually in need of a house? Who are the people who are living in the outskirts and traveling long ways back and forth, whereas city centers keep absolutely abandoned, mostly after pandemics. So in that sense, is that we should, maybe it's a provocative idea to stop building, but the thing is to understand that we may have enough build space to accomplish, as well as with food, the needs we have as a society by now.
That sparked something. Several people look like they wanted to add to that. So I'll go to you,
And
Rafaela.
urban developers here are going to kill me.
Yeah, I really agree with Ms. Realini. Maybe it can sound a little like utopian to think of not building anymore. But for example, in Santiago, in the center, we have a lot of non-use offices. So, I mean, they're doing some kind of these things in Europe, reusing this building and converting them into housing. Yeah, so I want to know how, what do you think about this, like reusing non-using buildings?
Totally. That's a way. There are many experiences throughout the world, because the good news is we do not have to invent anything. It's mostly thought of, reflected on, discussed, and in many cases actually implemented. Those are possibilities, like to reuse, to change the uses. Sometimes you have to go through some architectural transformations to transform an office into an actually living home. And there are also some experiences, for example, to give incentives to landlords to put their properties into social rental, which is a huge need, because we are not only talking about people living in slums or informal settlements, we're also talking about working middle classes that find it severely difficult to access like a regular small apartment near to their homes. So there are experiences on Barcelona has made very good efforts within Ada Colau's government to promote social housing. There are also in Buenos Aires, we have very good experiences of housing cooperatives that are, when given the possibility and the resources by the government, they can produce very low price construction with excellent quality, extremely beautiful, and accessible to working families. So yeah, there are many tools in terms of public policies to do this. But yeah, in the first place, you have to understand what has been produced, for what purposes, for what interests, for what social groups, and how you redistribute those in terms of necessity, obviously in terms of democratic participation, but I think it's possible, yes, and that's a good example.
So should we, wherever possible, reuse existing buildings? Clearly, yes. And I think there's a sustainable and environmental aspect to that that's worth bringing in. If you, this is research that was done in the UK, if you knock down a Victorian, 19th century semi-detached house and put up in its place, the most environmentally friendly passive house home, you've basically burnt about 100 years worth of embodied carbon, either carbon used to make that house. So even though the house you've just built is far more energy efficient to run, the energy in use, you basically need about 80 years just to catch up. So probably you shouldn't have done it. You should have recycled, reused the building. So should we create buildings that through their physicality and their form are worthy of reuse and recycling? And wherever possible, should we recycle and reuse old ones? Clearly yes. And it's not just actually about the environment, it's also about stories, where we started this conversation, because people wished, or most people, about 70% of people, wish to be in communion with the past as well as with the present and the future. And they need to be able to tell the stories of their places and their homes. I wouldn't, we're going to courteously disagree. I wouldn't take from that the conclusion that we should build nothing, no wherever. I know you're not quite saying that. I'll give an example again from Europe. So in towns that are flourishing and thriving, all the flats above shops are occupied because people wish to be living there or need to, or it's a good place to live. When you go in the UK, to a town that is struggling, where there is not enough demand, where people are leaving or haven't come back, and there are quite a lot of ex-industrial towns in the UK, as there are in much of the world, that's when you find the empty flats above the shops or empty homes is because not enough people wish to be there. Either they can't get the right job or they don't wish to live there. There's a town, I'll name it because I said this publicly before, there's a town called Grimsby on the east coast of England. It's actually now, it was a fishing town and a tourist town, so it's had a bad 20th century, or late 20th century. It's actually got some money coming into it now because there's a lot of offshore wind being built in the North Sea. So there is actually money coming into this town. We've got a long-standing project there. We're planting street trees with one of the poorest communities in England. But most of the money is just flowing straight in and straight out again. Because people with agency, to use the fashionable term, people who can choose where to live, are not choosing to live in Grimsby. It would be more convenient for them to live there, but something about it isn't working for them. So yeah, I would say we need to get that virtuous circle of place spinning faster to attract people in. That will sometimes be reusing old buildings. It will also be building new ones. But above all, back to the earlier point, it's about asking, and there's a role for government here as well for all of us, where do people wish to be? Where do they love being? Where do they wish to have their homes, to raise their children, and to spend their days in our brief passage through this world?
Akel, you heard Nicholas refer to it as a virtuous circle. For some people, that will include mega projects, skyscrapers, making the skyline beautiful. Does that inspire civic pride, or does that distract from what everyday people living on the ground floor have to deal with day to day?
I grew up in a brownstone in Brooklyn, New York, which was 4 floors. You know what the fun was? I could hear the ice cream truck coming. And by the time I get down with my $2.50, I can get my ice cream.
It's expensive ice cream.
I am, now mind you, I live in the Pearl in Qatar on the 31st floor, and I love it. But it's just me and my wife. If I had kids, I would not raise them on the 31st floor. So I'm not against high-rise buildings, but I think if you want to raise kids, if you want to raise a family, there's something about being able to access the outdoors. Fez is one of my favorite cities. I would live in Fez. There are courtyard houses. The buildings are 5 floors high. And the interesting thing is that in the 15th century, when Muslims were being expelled from Spain, they went to Fez. 300,000 people were accommodated in Fez. So there are lessons to be learned from Fez. So to answer your question, I think it all depends on who is benefiting from this kind of mega structure. Is it detrimental to a lifestyle that is emotionally vulnerable? We have to look at all of the factors that influence whether we go up or we go horizontally. The government and the people, they have to organize themselves so that their demands and their needs are met. And you know, in many ways, I don't know if you're familiar with the civil rights movement in the United States. It was this groundswell of the masses that came together and fought. It's not going to be an easy process, but you can't give up, right? And so if people are empowered, then their rights will be guaranteed and their voices will be heard. So this is one of the ways that we could address the systemic problems that face cities that are hemorrhaging. So, you know, there has to be some kind of movement. You can't just rely on the government to do it for themselves. There has to be the people who are empowered to make those demands and to bring it to the attention of those who control the policies and so on.
Akel, that is a perfect place to end this portion of our debate. This has been a great debate, but we are running out of time. And so I have just enough time to get a final round of answers from my guests here on a question that affects our students on stage and those who will be watching. It's the future. Looking ahead, cities are going to change in ways that we probably can't even imagine. So for young people who are entering fields like architecture, urban planning, where should they focus their energy if they want to make the biggest difference? Guadalupe.
Well, picking up on these last comments, I would say that obviously all of us have wishes and desires, but not all of us get to accomplish them. Most people do not live where they wish to live, but where they can afford it, and in the conditions they can afford it. So one thing is, how do we deal with that situation? How do we make most people match their wishes and desires with other possibilities? Meanwhile, urban planning keeps being developed with a white man Western mindset, even when women take decisions, I must assume that. But that mindset leaves behind also all the people you have been mentioning, women, elder people, people who have any disabilities. So we should also think of the discipline and the practices around the decisions we take, again, understanding that the city is a product of political decisions.
Nicholas, your final thoughts.
So the first question we started was, do we need to reinvent the city? Well, we possibly need to improve many cities. In fact, we definitely do need to improve many cities. And in the literal English sense of the word, we need a revolution, in the sense that we need to rediscover some of the wisdom of the past, as well as some of the good practice of the present. The cities of the future, if we're lucky, we may not be, will be greener. They'll have more trees. Yes, they'll be more equitable. There'll be more natural places in which to spend time. They will allow people to come together. They will encourage prosperity by making it easy to build, but also making it easy to preserve. They'll have a strict carapace within which people are free to do things, whether they're men or women or whatever they are. And they will adjust to the local climate. If we come in and try and over-regulate cities, think that just one or two people sitting in City Hall know all the answers, I would argue that all the evidence of the past says that when only one or two people are making decisions, rather than allowing decisions to be organically made by all of us for our own lives, then that leads to cities that fail and that are dystopian. And the 20th century, sadly, and we're living with the legacy of the 20th century, gives us more than enough examples for that.
Akel.
I wish I could end on an optimistic note, but as I sit here, I'm thinking about Gaza. And I ask my students, how would you, if you were commissioned to rebuild Gaza, the city of Gaza, right? How would you approach it? And it's an ongoing exercise. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I know that architects have a role to play, but the political, system that we're dealing with is often the real challenge and the real devil in the detail. And so I'm not going to, give up, but I'm going to think about those who really need a place to live. The people who are living in, despicable circumstances. So architects have to be activists. You can't just do pretty drawings and celebrate your work. You have to think about the people. And so this is where I am today. Tomorrow I might have a change of mind, but inshallah.
Inshallah. Architects have to be activists. I wrote that down. Note to self.
Yeah.
Thank you for this conversation, because that brings us to the end of this Doha Debates Town Hall. We'd like to thank our partner and our host, Qatar's Years of Culture Initiative. And thank you to Qatar Foundation for bringing all of us together to have this conversation. Of course, this majlis would not be possible without you, our audience here in Buenos Aires, and our viewers around the world. We sought out truth and understanding. We heard powerful ideas, sharp arguments, and some personal reflections. But the conversation does not end here. Now it is your turn. How do you think the cities of tomorrow should be built, and what purpose should they serve? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep this conversation going. Thank you.